Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk about the work I've been doing for the last several years, which is on ecology-based design. What is ecology-based design? It is designing with nature based on the science of ecology. And the reason why we're doing it is for the resilient future of the planet. But why ecology? Ecology is simply stated, ecology is the environmental context for everything that we do on the planet, for all human activities, and upon which the planet's health is dependent. And so we should start with ecology because as the ecology is damaged, devastated, then the planet is affected. So we must look at the planet in its ecology as a whole. Now, ecology isn't the only factor in design. But design must do the following things. It must function effectively, it must work. If design doesn't work, that's a useless piece of hardware. It must meet criteria, the usual criteria of health, safety of the people, users. A good architecture design must engender human well-being. It must make people happy. It must give pleasure to their lives. And then it must also be immensely beautiful because this is what we are about. We are artists. It has to be aesthetically fulfilling. If it's not beautiful, then you don't need an architect. You just need a draftsman or an engineer. It must be inspiring. It must engender a sense of achievements in people. And then finally, it has to be green. And so being green, ecologically positive, is not the only factor. There are other factors in design. So today, I'm just talking about ecology, but the other factors, I will discuss it perhaps on another day, but not today. So now we're designing with ecology. What are the factors? Well, we start with nature because nature consists of the biosphere, the biogeochemical cycles around the planet, and the ecosystems, and humans. The second factor in ecological design is human society, our social systems, our economic, our political, institutional, and also obviously our cultural systems. Then there's water. Now, water is part of nature, but I've taken it out as a separate factor because water is what life is all about. Without water, there's no organism, there's no living systems. When astronomers look into the sky at planets and at asteroids, the first they look for is signs of water. If there's water, there's life, there's organic life. And so now water is very important. There's water that comes from the rivers, comes from the rain, comes from the seas, comes from the snow, comes from waterways. And so there's groundwater as well. Then the next would be everything that we make and do as human beings. That's the built environment. There's the structures, infrastructure. It's in fact everything that we make as human beings. Clothing, cars, radio, mobile telephones. And finally, there's the energy systems for which our whole human society is dependent upon. So these are the key factors in ecological design. But each of these factors has an objective that we must try and achieve. And so for nature, we have to try and achieve a net positive ecological benefits for the planet. And for hydrology, you have to have net zero water so that the water that we use is returned back to the land. And then for the structure and infrastructure, we have to make sure there's net zero waste because there's no such thing as throwing the waste somewhere else. The planet is a closed system, there's nowhere else. And finally, there's energy. Energy is essentially our use of non-renewable sources of energy. If all our sources of energy is renewable, then we need not consider this factor. Design then is one of integration of all these 5 factors into a whole. And that is the challenge that we must try and achieve in ecology, in an ecology-based design. But let's start with nature. Nature is actually this thin film around the planet called the biosphere, where organisms live. And within this, the biosphere, there are units which are called ecosystems. Ecosystem consists of communities of plants and animals acting together to form a whole. It's a holistic system. Holism is a property that differentiates organisms from technological systems to mechanical systems, because mechanical systems are not holistic. The whole is not greater than the sum of its parts. Now, within this community of animals and the physical environment, there is us as human beings. Now, human beings are in fact part of the animal community, part of the species in nature. I've taken this out because we are different from all the other species in nature. They're the most powerful of all species. We can change the planet, we can change the landscape, we can deforest the trees, we can change the climate, we can change the biogeochemical cycles. We are the most powerful of all species in nature. And with this power, we have to exercise this with great care. Now, we make things. I call this a built environment. We make more things than any other species in nature. We make buildings, we make infrastructure, we make all sorts of things. We make clothing, we make toys, we make food. Now, it does interface of what we and the built environment do on the planet in a very careless and non-caring way. That is the cause of environmental disasters and conflicts, causes of extreme environments, and all the issues that the world is experiencing now. If you talk to scientists, they say we don't have very much time left. We have maybe about 30 to 50 years left before the environment becomes, if we continue what we do, becomes so toxic that human beings cannot survive. But nature doesn't care. Nature, if you kill yourself, all human beings become extinct. Nature will continue and will recover. We'll do it over time, but it will recover. So nature doesn't really care. So what we're doing in sustainable design is really for the future of human beings and all the species and the environments on the planet. And so we have to be careful of what we do, and we have to start now. Now, one of the ways we need to do, according to me, is to remake our built environments into what are called human-made ecosystems or constructed ecosystems. A constructed ecosystem is the built environment that emulates, replicates, and augments with nature. So these started to do research on the properties of ecosystems that we need to emulate and replicate and augment. So on the left-hand side is a list of characteristics of the ecosystem that we must emulate, so that our built environment becomes constructed ecosystems, and by being constructed ecosystems, it becomes a part of nature, but not a disparate environment as it is today. And so I started to look into each of these as properties of ecosystems to find out how we can interpret this by design. So that, in a nutshell, is what I'm trying to do in my work. How to emulate, replicate, and augment the built environment, the existing built environment, and remake it so that it becomes part of the natural environment. But if you look at the existing built environment today, if you look at its biological structure, you find that it is almost physical. Where is the community? Where's the body constituents? You can see the big question mark. Look at the room that you're in at the moment. Everything in this room, except for you and the bugs, is inorganic. And so the first proposition I gave to myself, the first challenge I gave to myself is, how can we bring more body constituents into the built environment? And so I started to look at patterns. You can put it on one location, as you can see here. You can have a spotty relationship, as you can see here. You can have a stepping stone relationship where the patches of greenery are not quite connected. But some species can move from one patch to the other patch, but it's not ideal. So the ideal is where it's connected and linked. That's like what I call a tree structure, where you have a stem and you have fingers sticking out. And then this ideal pattern is the spiraling pattern, where the ecology is connected. Species can move from one part to the other part to site. But being connected, it enables a larger pool of natural resources to be shared among the species. And by having a net larger pool of resources to be shared among the species. Now, this, if you like, is a diagram of a progression of what we could do to green our city. Okay, we start with the city, as you can see, number one, which is barren with almost devoid of any vegetation, although there are some green areas, as I mentioned earlier on. Second, we start with plants. We start to increase the planting into the built environment. That's what they're doing in many cities today, which is what we're doing in Singapore today, for instance. And that is to try and integrate it into a greater, better, more tighter relationship between the vegetation and the built environment. The fourth is where we try to transform the built environment. Not just bring vegetation in, but change materials we use, change the energy systems we adopted. And of course, six is then the eventual status where it becomes the whole built environment, becomes the constructed ecosystem. That's, if you like, is a series of stages. When people ask me, how do you green a city? These are the stages we have to go through to reach from 1 to number 5. And so let's look at this ideal pattern on the last one. And so we need to connect the city, not just in the ground plane, but on the ground plane, like this ability should go vertically up the building. So then the whole city is green, not just at the ground plane, but at the upper parts of the building as well. And so this is one of the strategies we must adopt in our design. In greening the buildings and bringing vegetation in, we have to create habitats. Habitats could be patches of greenery on the ground, habitats in the walls, habitats in terraces and the roofs and so forth. So this is S strategy, which is what we must do in our design. And so going back to this diagram, this is one of the early schemes that we did, where we had a patchy relationship. And as I mentioned earlier on, this is not ideal. This is, the green is not connected. But these were early days. This was about 30 years ago when I started to put vegetation buildings. And so I had corner terraces, I had balconies, I put vegetation outside. And this is what it looks like in a building that we did. It's a 35-story building with vegetation on the outside. And these are terraces and where the vegetation is located. So next, to see how we can increase the biodiversity. So after the biological structure, we start looking at biodiversity of the locality of the development. And this diagram on the right-hand side is a useful diagram because although it applies to butterflies, it indicates that biodiversity is highest near the equator. As you move away from the equator, biodiversity gets less and less. And for instance, London is about 52 degrees above the equator, so it is not as biodiverse as it is in the tropics. Now, going back to creating habitats, this is what we should be doing. And this is one of the projects that we did about 5 years ago, where we create habitats within the built environment, within the balconies, within the roof, within the ground, and within the walls. And the building is the complex is essentially 2 chevron-shaped buildings. They're not exact symmetrical; they're asymmetrical, and they're chevron-shaped because I have to provide, I should not build on the axis between the plaza and the top. And so you can see the plaza, you can see the axis going down to the monument on the waterfront, and then that's a boulevard, which is on the other side of the site. So what we do is then we do research on the site on a species that we have removed from the site, the human beings have removed the site, because when we were given the site, it was just brown earth. So we need to see what form of species we want to bring back into the site. But before we do that, we had to create habitats within the built environment. And these are the different habitats in different parts of this project. And then within the habitats, we try to identify the faunal species that we want to bring in. And then having identified the faunal species indigenous to this locality, which are not hazardous to human beings, we try and identify floral species that will attract the faunal species. And then from there, we look into the interaction between the fauna and floral species with the habitats. So you can see that square, red rectangle. And then from this, we use this as a basis for designing the landscape aspects and the habitats of the project. One of the devices we use in this building is what we call the EcoCell. EcoCell is a linked vegetation ramp that starts from the ground floor or the third floor of this project. It spirals all the way down to the basement. So this is what we call EcoCell. And it brings daylight, it brings vegetation, it brings natural ventilation in the inner parts of the building. So this is the EcoCell for this particular building. There's this axis that cuts through the site from the plaza, the semicircular plaza on the right-hand side, right down to the waterfront. This is an urban design factor that we have to respect. And so that cuts our site into two. I put out like a single building block that extends from one part of the site to the other part of the site, or like a bridge over it. In between the two blocks, we have this space which we tried, which is actually a bit barren now, but it is a very lively space during festival days, like national days and New Year and Christmas. We wanted to make the building look upmarket, so we took the faceted idea of a gem and we faceted the facade. But by designing this, you can see we have cut voids, not in a regular basis, but in a composed way, where we put the planting in. And then the voids are actually between, it's a double skin building, and there's the outer skin, which is of glass with fitted white patterns. And then we have an inner skin, which is vertical, but the outer skin can be shaped in order to give it the faceted look of the gem. So the third image is how it looks from the outside. You can see the fitted glass pattern, fitted glass that we use. They're not exactly butt jointed. They're there's an air gap so the ventilation can flow through. And then the last image is what it looks from the inside of the building looking out. So you can actually see through the photograph as the outside. So these are the patterns that we use, and it is the horticultural pattern that we use for the fitted glass. But for the west side of the building, we angle the glass to address the western sun. And so in this way, it's quite clear that, this is the western side of the building. And you can in fact tell the orientation of the building looking at whether it's north, south, east, or west, by looking at the facade. These are the axes that drives the design, the shaping of the building form. And so there is the building, there is the axis from the semicircular plaza down to the waterfront. At the bottom of the waterfront is a spire, like a needle, which is the Millennium Monument for Putrajaya, which is the name of the city, which is the capital city of Kuala Lumpur. So now, what about the vertical interpretation of the biodiversity matrix? Because it's easier to do biodiversity matrix on the horizontal medium-rise buildings, low-rise and medium-rise buildings, because of the species that we adopt. But for the vertical form, we started to look into the species that we need to bring back to enhance the biodiversity at the upper levels of the building. So the idea was, as you can see here, a tree-shaped building where we had vegetation that climbs up like a tree, and then it spreads out like branches into pockets of balconies, which also collects rainwater. So in many ways, the building is a rainwater magnet that collects the rainwater, which is then recycled. We start by looking into the site in relation to its context, and within the context, we look at the species of flora and fauna that we want to bring back to the site. It's important that the selection of species are not invasive species, because invasive species would then totally destroy the ecology of the belt. And so we do research on the birds and on the animals and on the fauna at the ground plane, and we do research on the flora that will attract them. These are the different organic life, the species of constituents we want to bring back to the site. These are the habitats we create within the site on the ground, in the face of the building, in terraces, in the roof, and so forth. And so the idea was to attract butterflies and dragonflies at the low part of the building, and then near the low part would be the butterflies. And then from the middle section, we would have songbirds, and for the upper part, we have migratory birds. So in this way, we choose the species, we choose the vegetation, the flora to attract these species. That's the upper part of the building, and that's the roof, the canopy over the building. And the building actually has 4 swimming pools. We have the lap pool, the family pool, we have the jacuzzi pool, and we have the children's pool. So these are the 2 pools in the upper parts of the building. This is the biodiversity matrix for the project, down to different birds that you can see on the left-hand side, and different other species that we want to bring back, bring into the site to enhance this biodiversity. But for the final diagram, the spiraling diagram, this is my, if you like, ideal form. We're starting to look into ways we can bring the vegetation spiraling up the system. This is a design for a cultural building where we have a ramp on the outside. The vegetation becomes a ramp that starts to spiral all the way up from the ground, all the way up to the top of the building. And that whenever the ramp reaches the roof of the giant building, we then bridge across and vegetate the giant building. So in this way, the existing city then becomes eventually green. So this is a concept, this is an idea that we're trying to achieve with this building. And so, taking this idea further, the intention then is to have a series of ramps around the building, which connects the vegetation to the ground plane. And our design here is to achieve 1 floor for every facade. For every facade, the ramp covers 1 floor. Then for the other facade, goes another floor and spirals all the way up. And so this is the inspirational drawing that we did. You can see the ramp, you can see the vegetation, you can see the facade of the building. Now the idea is to have the ramp to service the vegetation without going to the user spaces on inside. So this is an improvement of the early design. And that by doing this, we create a building which is similar to that ramp pattern that you see on the left-hand side. And so eventually got those things about 5-8 years to get a client to agree to it. And you can see the walking, the people, you can see the vegetation, you can see the facade. And that because it spirals all the way up to the top of the building, we call this a linear park, a park that is, like a linear park. But to avoid the monotony of a linear park, we punctuate the corners of the building with skycones. And so with the vegetation going up, at the corners of the building, we have terraces where people can interact with people inside, but it gives a such amount of relief as you go to the park, you meet these terraces. We have a number of experiments in this building. One of them is what we call a diagonal light shaft. But the building actually, before we get to the light shaft, is actually two buildings united by this common skin on the outside. And then in between is this atrium, and the atrium is covered by a glass between like sunlight roof, and that's in daylight, and less of air. But on an open day, on a normal day, when it's not inclement, there's no rainfall, we open up the roof, it automatically opens up. The rain automatically shuts, let the hot fresh air out, and then within the space we have the cold air being blown into the space. And then for the now, we start to look into how we can bring vegetation into the city. This is the fingers concept, where we have a series, we pick up all the vegetation on the outside and we bring it into the building. And the idea was to we bring the vegetation as close as possible to the built-up area, so that it provides ecosystem services to the built-up area. And so we collected the species along the waterfront, bring it up by these series of fingers from the edge of that edge of building. From the other edge, we bring the urban areas, the built areas down, so that we have some weaving pattern of the vegetation from the ground, or from the waterfront, going up to the middle of the land, and then the built area goes all the way down. This is a master plan that we did in India, where we tried to integrate the vegetation in a similar way. But this time we bring it right across the site. And so on the other side, on the right-hand side of the site is the forest reserve. We collect all the species, then we have a series of vegetative fingers stretching across the site. So when it hits the other edge of the site, we can link the vegetation on from the other sides as well. So this way, the whole locality becomes a linked habitat for species within the environment. So looking back into some of these aspects, like in nature, this is the master plan. You can see the shape of it being made. It's not exactly regular or straight, but it is curved and goes to the edges of the building. And these are the ecological fingers that extend from the spine down to the edges of the building. But once we lay the roads on top of this, the road bifurcates, cuts the vegetation in the green areas. And so one of the ways to maintain the continuity of the vegetation is what we call an eco-bridge. An eco-bridge is essentially a bridge that spans over the driveway. The vegetation can use from one part of the site, the other part of the site, in a continuous pattern. And so this way we're able to maintain the linked vegetation to defragment the site to the right, because what we even do is to fragment every site through roads, through fences, through impervious surfaces. And ecology design must seek to try and reconnect the green areas into a whole again. This is a drawing that I did of all the summarized in the slide. All the green features, how to green the city, through ecological bridges, through ecological corridors, through ecological rooms, green walls, green terraces, and so forth. And so there's a summary diagram of ecological practice. To revisit what we showed earlier on, these are different ways we could green the city through the patchy relationship is the first one. The second one is the series of spotty relationship. Third is the stepping stone. Fourth is the tree concept. And the fifth is the spiral interconnected city or the corridor with fingers, which is the ideal pattern we should try and adopt in as much as possible. Infrastructure is important. And what a lot of green architects are doing are just building green buildings over this infrastructure. But if we continue to build in this way, in a very piecemeal, ad hoc way, it'll be extremely difficult to make the city green. So to make the city green, we must start at the outset with the infrastructure. What happens if we start with the green infrastructure? The energy system is green, the water supply is green, the sewage system is green, practices are green. Then anything that we put in after that becomes make the city even greener. And so what we want to do is to when we start doing green design, start with the infrastructure, start with the diagram on the left side. And that is the first thing we do with every city, is not just putting vegetation in, but to make this infrastructure green. Now, the most difficult aspect of properties we have to provide is what we call ecosystem services. Ecosystem services is the list of these items, of these things that nature does for us without human intervention. It's not for free. We don't have to do anything by nature. Nature automatically does this for us. But what if we continue to deforest the planet? Nature's ability to provide ecosystem services is reduced, and we continue to deforest and to clear the planet of vegetation. We will totally have a planet that is incapable of providing ecosystem services. And so we decide the ecological design, a design must function effectively, it must work, must meet criteria, it must engender human well-being, must be messy, beautiful, and be inspiring. And these are the 5 factors we need to consider in ecological design. Nature, our built environment and its impacts, our structures. We should try and make it into zero waste, and that all these materials that we use are recyclable. And finally, our energy systems got to be renewable sources and should not use up fuel that contaminates the built environment. So in summary, this is what ecological design is all about.